In this segment, we study what is consumer surplus. Now, what is consumer surplus? Consumer surplus is the excess of the price which a consumer is willing to pay rather than going without a thing over what he actually does pay. Consumer surplus is nothing but the price that a consumer is willing or ready to pay for a commodity minus what he actually pays for it. So, in short, consumer surplus can be summed up as what a consumer is ready to pay minus what he actually pays. Let's say you want an ice cream. It's a summer season. It's pretty hot out there. Wouldn't you like to have an ice cream? You surely would. So, when you want to have the ice cream, you may be ready to pay 30 rupees for it, or you may be ready to pay 50 rupees for it. But how much does the ice cream actually cost? It costs you only 20 rupees. Now, you are ready to pay even 50 rupees for an ice cream which is costing only 20 rupees. The difference of 50 minus 20 is nothing but what we call consumer surplus. So, in short, consumer surplus can be defined as what a consumer is ready to pay for a product, for a commodity, minus what he actually pays. Now, the important thing here to note is what a consumer generally wants or what a consumer has a craving for, what he desperately wants. The consumer generally is ready to pay more than the actual price. A consumer wouldn't mind paying more than what it actually costs. But for products where the consumer is not interested, he might not want to buy it. He might just ignore that product and stay without buying it. In that case, we can say that there will be no consumer surplus. One thing important to note is that consumer surplus has been derived from the law of diminishing marginal utility. We'll see how. This is a consumer surplus schedule. Now, this is a schedule where the consumer is consuming a chocolate, let's say a Cadbury chocolate. Now, this chocolate costs the consumer 20 rupees. Now, let's see what is the utility that he derives from it. Now, please understand that we are equating utility with price here. We are comparing the utility derived against the price paid. In short, we can also say here in the schedule that 1 rupee equals to 1 utility or 1 rupee equals to 1 unit of satisfaction. So, the marginal utility of 30 equals to 30 units of utility, while the price that he pays is 20. So, we can say that the utility derived in respect or in relation to price paid is more. So let's see what happens as the consumer goes on increasing his consumption. Now at the first unit, as we've already discussed, the consumer derives a utility of 30 while he pays the price of 20. At the second unit, now the marginal utility falls because the law of diminishing marginal utility comes into play. So the utility or the marginal utility at the second unit is 28. Likewise, the marginal utility at the third unit falls to 26. At the fourth unit, it falls to 24. At the fifth unit, it falls to 22. At the sixth unit, it becomes 20. And finally, at the seventh unit, it becomes 18. While the price of the product remains the same, the consumer cannot change the price of the product. The price of the chocolate is always the same, irrespective of the number of units he consumes. Nor can the seller change the price, so price is assumed to be constant. But utility derived from it does not remain constant. It goes on falling. It falls at every level of consumption. Now let's see what is the consumer surplus at each level. Let me remind you, consumer surplus is nothing but what a consumer is ready to pay minus what he actually pays. What a consumer is ready to pay minus what he actually pays. This is consumer surplus. Now, as I said, we have assumed 1 rupee utility, 1 rupee equals to 1 utility. So, when the consumer consumes the first unit, he gets a utility of 30. So, wouldn't he be ready to pay 30 rupees for it? He'll surely be ready to pay 30 rupees for it because he is deriving a satisfaction level which is equivalent to 30 rupees. So he is ready to pay 30 rupees. So what will be the consumer surplus here? 30 minus 20. 20 is the cost of the product, 20 is the price of the product, and he actually pays the price of the product. So he's ready to pay 30, but he actually pays 20. So the consumer surplus at first unit is 10, 30 minus 20. What is the situation at consumption of second unit? When he consumes second unit, he derives a utility of 28. A utility of 28 means a utility of 28 rupees. So the consumer would be ready to pay 28 rupees for the second unit of the product. However, he actually pays only 20 rupees. So the consumer surplus at the second level would be 8 rupees or 8. At the third unit consumption, he derives a utility of 26. So at the third unit, the consumer surplus would be 26 minus 20. Likewise, at the fourth unit, it will be 24 minus 20. At the fifth unit, it will be 22 minus 20. At the sixth unit, it will be 0 because the consumer is deriving a utility of 20. He is paying 20. So there is no excess of utility. He is paying what is actually the cost, and that cost is equal to the utility he is deriving. So 20 minus 20 will give him no excess. There is no surplus. Thus, the consumer surplus at this level is 0. And when the marginal utility furthermore decreases at the consumption of 7th chocolate, we'll have no consumer surplus because the consumer surplus has already reached its lowest level, that is 0. And when marginal utility reduces, then the price of the product, the consumer wouldn't actually want to purchase it, because the consumer is ready to pay only 18 rupees at the 7 chocolate. He's ready to pay only 18 rupees for the 7 chocolate, but he has to pay 20 rupees. So the consumer possibly buy that will not buy the 7 chocolate. So if we calculate, if we take a sum at all the levels of consumer surplus, the total would be 30. 10 for the first chocolate, 8 for the second, 6 for the third chocolate, 4 for the fourth chocolate, 2 for the fifth chocolate, 0 for the sixth chocolate. The addition would be 30. So we can say when the consumer consumes 6 chocolates, his consumer surplus would be 30. And this is where the consumer should stop. The consumer should stop the consumption at the 6th unit, because this is the level where the utility derived from the product is equal to the willingness of the price that he is ready to pay. Let's understand this thing better with the help of a graph. Now here we have a graph which displays consumer surplus. Going back to the schedule, we'll plot the points on the graph and let's see what is the consumer surplus. We have shown in the graph that the consumer starts with 30 rupees. That is a utility of 30. We have taken price and marginal utility on y-axis and number of unit on x-axis. So he starts with 30. When he purchases the first chocolate, he gets a satisfaction of 30, and the satisfaction level goes on decreasing as he consumes more and more chocolates. So it goes on falling. And at the 6th unit, the consumer surplus is 0. Why? Because the marginal utility is equal to the price. The marginal utility here is 20. The price is also 20. So the consumer surplus is 0 here. This is the 6th unit. Now what happens is the consumer goes on consuming 6 units. For the first unit he was ready to pay 30. For the second unit he was ready to pay 28. For the third unit 26, so on and so forth till he reaches 0. But the consumer consumes only till the 6th unit, because at that level the MU curve equals the price curve. This is where MU curve intersects the price curve, or in short I can say MU equals to price at this level, and both are 20. Now what do you think the consumer has actually spent? The consumer has actually spent the consumer has actually spent 20 rupees into 6 units, which is 120 rupees. He has actually spent 120 rupees till the 6th unit of consumption. This can also be calculated with the help of the graph. This is 6 and this is 20, and this is a rectangle. The area bordered with the red ink is a rectangle where the length is 20 and the breadth is 6. So the area will be 20 into 6, which equals to 120. Now, how do we calculate consumer surplus with the help of the graph? In the schedule, we have the answer that the consumer surplus is 30. We can shade this portion in the graph as well. This portion is the consumer surplus. The consumer was ready to pay 30, he paid only 20. The consumer was ready to pay 28, he paid only 20. The consumer was ready to pay 26, but he paid 20 for all the goods. So this portion, which is outlined with the green ink, shows consumer surplus. But how do we quantify it with the help of the graph? Now, please take a close look at this figure, the green outlined figure. It is actually a triangle. It's a right angled triangle. And how do we calculate the area of a triangle? It is half into height into base. Now the base here remains 6. The height here is 10. So half into height, which is 10, base is 6, equals to half into 60. This equals 30. So we have found out the consumer surplus with the help of the graph. So this is what is consumer surplus. Now in the books you will find that it is a academic toy or it is a theoretical concept, but this concept is very much relevant in the practical life. You would have seen that consumers do not go and purchase the products at their price, the price which is tagged on the product, but they tend to negotiate for it, but they tend to bargain for it. Now this bargaining is nothing but consumer surplus for them. They are ready to pay a particular price and they pay a different price. The difference of both is consumer surplus. Let's say a product is priced 100 rupees. Now a consumer wants to purchase it. He may be ready to purchase it for 100 rupees because he wants it. But he still bargains, but he still negotiates for it. He may purchase it for, let's say, 70 rupees after negotiation. So the difference would be the consumer surplus. 100 minus 70, the 30 would be consumer surplus. Again, from the seller's perspective, it is very important to understand what a consumer is willing to pay. A good seller does not sell his products to all the consumers at the same price, because all the consumers may not be ready to pay the same price for his product. It is imperative for him to understand what the consumer is ready to pay for his product. A certain consumer may be ready to pay double the price he is charging. So there he is losing business if he is selling his product for the same price to all the consumers. So again, from the seller's perspective, it is important that he knows what the consumer is ready to pay. So the concept consumer surplus is important to both the consumer as well as the seller.